You're live, yay! Hi, everybody. Sorry for the delay. We had some connectivity issues, but welcome. You can't see me, but you can. I'm the voice from above. I'm Jill Moniz, founder of Transformative Arts, and tonight I'm in conversation with two of the artists from Ali to LA initiative. And yes, go vote. Do what Edgar suggests. Edgar Arceneaux and April Banks. And so because we have gotten a late start, let's just jump right in. So part of the project of Ali to LA involved artists responding to Ali's legacy in Los Angeles. He came here in 1979 after he had retired, and then came right out of retirement to start working again for the greater good. And so I'm curious, I know, April, you did an enormous amount of research on Ali for this project. What was the thing that you found most compelling about what you learned?
Well, because I never follow the instructions, or maybe that's just not the way to say it. I was more inspired by
I think you said it right.
his life, a moment in his life before he came to Los Angeles, and that was all around the draft and his resistance to the draft. So a lot of my research was focused on that. But yes, and all the research that I did, I guess, I love doing research. So I watched, I don't know how many of the documentaries, movies, audiobooks that are out, and just learn, like most of us, and he's an incredibly layered and complex person, and is often portrayed in a flattened way, as like this boxer only, or maybe later in life as a political or a figure, a public figure. But he had a rich family life, and just his various interests around his art, his own personal art. Obviously, we know he thought of himself as a poet, magic tricks, just the lightness of his interest in helping children, and, kind of the soft side. And so, I just really enjoyed learning the complexity of who he was.
So it's a beautiful segue, because I think, Edgar, you live in a kind of complexity in terms of your art practice, and I mean that in the most beautiful and complimentary way.
Is there any other way to take that?
I don't know, but it's not about reductionism in your work. I think you like to live in the layers, and so how I think in your work definitely for this exhibition and this whole project reflects that. So could you talk to us about what made you connect with Ali, and what were those layers for you?
Yeah, well, I'm a big boxing fan, and I watch a lot of classic boxing. So it was, I've watched not all of Muhammad Ali's fights, but I've watched a lot of them. But I have this funny thing whenever I'm watching boxing, is that I feel like I relate just a little bit more to the person who loses a fight than the person who wins it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm always related to the person who gets beat up, who's like bloodied at the end, or, one punch and they go down. I'm like,
the underdog.
I relate to the underdog. You know what I mean? I love seeing a fight where the person comes back, which is why the Ali Foreman fight is like something I've watched over and over again. The Rumble in the Jungle. So the invitation to participate in the exhibition was partially because of my just love of the sport, but also it offered me an opportunity to do something creatively that I didn't have a space to do before, which is to work in the realm of sculpture. And since I was already in this headspace of making work that was inspired by my mother's dementia and her recent passing, I spent a lot of time sort of in the headspace of just thinking about the mind and what happens to the mind when someone is so beautiful and in control, and then being alongside them as they slowly start to break in different ways. And just thinking about those different facets that start to form that are dimensions of the person. And since I was doing these pieces where I was breaking glass and using percussion, breaking mirrors with a hammer or some other device, and then the pieces were, kind of being defined by these cracks and ridges and things like that. It didn't take too big of a leap to start to think about what happened to Muhammad Ali's mind, as he had also gone through this process of being so in control and having this sort of ability to speak and be able to turn a corner on a phrase, and just like the sharpness of his mind. But then recognizing that the mind is still there, but it's just in a shape in which you can't entirely recognize it. So that's sort of where I kind of come into the project, is to think about Muhammad Ali's, not so much as the figure who came to LA, but like the point towards the latter year of his life. The person who lost in the fight, but was still beautiful in the struggle.
I think both of your entry points really do focus on LA in different ways. I think one, because he started fighting for the winnings when he came to Los Angeles, that leads to what happened to his brain, in all of that fighting. Yeah. And I think that he was so shaped by what happened when they took away his title and his ability to earn a living, that when he finally was able to win back his title, he wanted to land softly for a moment. But one of the things I want us all to think about is how, and certainly in both of your works that you've made for this project, softness is a thing that is elusive to people of color, to Black men in particular. And I want you to reflect on, either one of you, how you think, and we talked originally when we first all got together about that sense of like what happens when you rest, and how he ends up reflecting, of course, on the fact that he can go out and make this money and help people, right? So his rest actually engenders more work, more labor, more service, more fracturing. And so I'm curious about what your thoughts are about that in the way that you approached your work, because both of you have done work that really lives in that space of the disjointedness and what's in between and the spaces in between.
Yeah.
Yeah, my work is using encaustic wax, which is inherently soft and flowy, but hardens, heat makes it molten, and it's hard to control, but beautiful accidents happen all the time, which is why I like to use it. So I think it adds a layer to whenever you're looking at a portrait or an image. This thing that a mentor early on that said that most of us really only see as if we're squinting or like looking through our fingers, like the level of diffusion that happens when most of us are looking at things, we're not looking at it in detail. I feel like the wax gives that filter. But in adding that filter, there's other things that you see. There's some other clarity that comes forward. It's like being in a dream space or daydreaming. And so, and then I work in a modular way. One, just the practicality of working with wax and trying to control it. I am not an expert, and so working in a smaller module allows me to control it better, but also I like what it does to start to fracture the image, and everything I've done in this series, there's always space in between, because I feel like the space forces you to look at the composition in a way and see or imagine more or interpret differently and just adds multiple reads, which I think is how we are as people. Like we have that complexity.
Certainly Ali
Yes.
was all of these things all at one time. You
Yes.
know, I mean, it's taking sort of Du Bois's notion of double consciousness to a whole other level of, intersectionality, where he is code switching on the second, and interacting and occupying different space.
Can I respond to something?
Absolutely.
That was nice. So when you were talking about the fuzziness idea, there's a kind of a when astronomers are observing stars, they know that if you stare at it directly, that it will blind you. So the best way to observe the clarity of a bright star in the sky is to look at it indirectly, is to look at it through the peripheral vision. Because it's through your peripheral vision that you can see it most clearly. And to this point about softness or landing, I went with it a little bit differently, which in my mind, just sort of thinking about it in relationship to the thing which is in front of you, which shines so bright, but actually you can see it most clearly when it's not in the center. I was thinking about that in relationship to the performer. Like, I'm interested in when the performer comes off stage and when they're sitting in their dressing room and they're by themselves, and then they get to show you that part, which is the thing which is in the gaps, the point where they're, get to show you aspects of who they are, their vulnerabilities or their quirks or their kind of strangeness as well. And maybe the landing in LA became that place where he could be both a celebrity, he could be a figure who could, what happens when you become a public figure is that you attract attention, and with attention comes power, and with power comes resources, and then you can redirect those things. But I like thinking about the vulnerable part of that person, the part that maybe they don't show, the kind of the armored part of them that they just kind of have on their own when they're sitting by themselves. To me, those are the spaces I'm interested in trying to explore.
Well, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your palette, your color palette, because I think that there's something in there, about that either resting place or in those gaps or crevices, both of the mind and of our thinking, like the darkness versus the light. And so you have this juxtaposition in your work, and I'm wondering if that's why you use the silver nitrate.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, technically the silver nitrate is not a color. I mean, it is it's silver, but it's kind of, it is whatever is around it, right? So, I mean, it kind of reflects whatever's around it. I like that part of it. It means it's not innately one thing, but it's inherently relational, right? It's always negotiating some connection to whatever is around it. To me, I connect it to be like breathing in the room, like it's just active, right? It's just like it's not, frozen like a photograph. But the color choices in particular for the sculptures that I made for this show, I just grabbed a bunch of different paints, and then once I got them here, and I was like, how do they combine together? And then I thought, what is the color of a bruise? Right? Like, you have a bruise, and at one point it's a little bit red, and the next day it's a little bit blue and green, and at some point it gets a little bit lighter, and then it kind of disappears again. Or what is the color of a cut if someone hits you in the face and it opens up? Before the blood comes out, it's either white or pink. Right? I was like, what does that look like? So in the color choices, I was trying to get towards the colors of bruises, and sometimes I got a little better than other parts. You know what I mean? There's one that's really pink. I was like, well, It's a little too pink. And there's one that's more green that I wanted it to be green, but some people when they bruise it turns green. It turns depending upon your complexion. And then the black one, there was a lot of blue in there, which is a kind of a common trope for folks to think about the residue traumas, blues, blacks, those kinds of things. But that's where that came from. But those things really just exude themselves through the cracks of the mirror itself. Tones it.
I am going to shift just a little bit to the work that happened, or to what happened in here. You guys, everybody works almost sort of solo in their studios, and I forced you all into one space. Speaking of oozing, Edgar, Arceneaux. So I wonder if you could talk about how that process felt and went. And I mean, I will not be offended.
Ask April first. Ask April. She was in here cooking paint. She had an iron out. I was looking at her. I was like, what is she doing over there?
Yeah.
Did anybody see her process? She had a hot plate. She had an iron on it. I was like, it's already hot. I was like, is she over there cooking paint? I've never seen anybody do that before.
Yeah, well, that's the nature of encaustic. It's like you have to work quickly. It hardens, and then you have to heat it to, and then whatever tool you use to reheat it changes the texture of the surface. So the iron, if I want something really smooth, or I can carve into it, which is what I was trying to do with the circular shape. Any kind of brush adds a texture or stroke. So it's partly like experiment. I think I was definitely going for like a skin texture, but that's not the question you asked. The question you asked.
Oh yeah, how do we work together? Oh yeah.
So
how do we work in the space?
Yes.
And not try to kill each other. Yeah.
Well, that wasn't. I don't feel like it was a challenge around each other because we weren't really all here at the same time. I mean, I enjoyed our conversations.
We had masks on though. So
yes.
And lots of fans. We probably weren't even talking about the same thing. Oh, that's right, April. Yeah, absolutely. Did you just say you're voting for Larry Elder? Is that what I heard? No, I'm talking about my elders. Oh. Okay,
Yes, there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
Especially when it starts getting late and you're busy. But I always enjoy collaborating and being around other artists. What I found a challenge was is the street and having an open space where anyone could walk in. And then obviously I was right by the door, all the movement by the window. And as you know, like the last week or so, I moved back to my studio because I just could not get into a zone. There's certain kinds of work I can do with other people around if it's more like production mode. But if I'm thinking and trying to solve problems, I'm too affected by all the energies. And people were curious. They just wanted to walk in and ask questions.
Like, why are you,
and I'm right there by the door.
A hot iron out?
It wasn't even that. No one really asked me other than other artists about material. They were more curious just about the show and about, what were we doing about Muhammad Ali, and then could they come? And there was a lot of people saying, could they show work and make work? And, so that part was a challenge. And I realized, I'm in a studio by myself that doesn't even really have windows where there's any kind of movement. So I feel like that was probably the biggest challenge for me.
I mean, it's worth mentioning that your studio is like around the corner. So it's easy for you to like pack up your shit and go.
Yes.
Yeah, me on the other hand, my studio is in Pasadena, so it's like when I brought everything in here and nobody was in here in the beginning, I was like, all this empty space? I just went from here to there. I started in this corner, and I went all the way to the door. And then eventually people started showing up, and they were like, so can we move your stuff? And I was like, why? I wasn't planning on leaving. I was like, I'm
I
staying.
know. I'm like, you have just spread yourself
I cannot say that it was man spreading, but I will say that there was territory that wasn't colonized, and damn it, I was colonized. Is that the same thing?
Sort
That's
of.
the same
A
thing.
little bit of patriarchy in there.
Yes. Anyway, I was all about the community, man. You know, I felt like the more I spread out, the more people knew what spaces they wanted because they couldn't have it, and then they pushed me back, and then I shrunk and got real small. And then, you know, but it was nice being in here because I would show up. Sometimes I had a key, and I would show up late at night, and then I could be in here as late as I want.
Yeah.
And since there's no cameras, you know,
You could do.
I can do whatever I want. I can dance and sing as loud as I want, as badly as I want. But it was really nice to be in the space with other people to see how they sat. How they sort of grounded themselves, and some people just became very focused in just this one thing. And some of us, you know, anyway, it was just nice. It was an energy which I did not expect to find. I was like, I don't know what I want to get here. But this space reminds me of like being in like Art in General or Artist Space in New York, you know, that's real rough and rugged and rough and like, we guys gonna figure this shit out kind of mentality. And I don't know, it just feels really nice.
But and you were so generous. I mean, I think you both were, and your professorial, your
spread.
Well, you know, your man spread was generous, but also,
Appreciate it.
you know, all the people who came in, you took the time to stop and speak and engage them and hear them,
Mm-hmm.
Which I did not.
which you did not. And but I think
Everyone
that
was like, I'm at
chills
the
over
door, but
there.
I do not work here.
Yes.
But
Artist is
it
working.
does take, it takes a certain person to allow someone to disrupt you and answer questions and, you know, and make that, and you did that over and over again. I watched you do that outside when you were working, inside when you were working. And that's a kind of generosity beyond your man spreading that,
That's generosity as well, Jim.
it is.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
But
The space was empty and it said, I need some love, and I gave it.
That's right. But you know, I can see how you are in the classroom.
I didn't mention this though. Thank you for the compliment, but I didn't mention this. But I did get to make some work in here that I really wanted to make.
I
And
know.
I didn't get a chance to do it in my own space. So, thank you.
You're welcome. I saw big sheets of things and then they
Yes.
just disappeared. And I was like, oh, well, clearly that's not
I
staying
told
here.
y'all, I said, some for y'all and some for me.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
I'm happy with the parts for me. What are you muttering over there?
Can we come back and use this space during the money?
Oh, can you? I'm taking back everybody's keys. I'm just like,
I have one more big painting I wanted to make. Anyway, we'll figure it out.
we
Maybe
can
on
work
a
that
Sunday.
out. Yeah, we can talk about that. Let's see, what else did I
One
want to?
thing I'll say that was a collective thing was this
Oh, we
piece.
did. We
Oh, my
danced
God.
and we did the Ollie shuffle and we exercised and then we're all sore because it exposed our age afterward as we were moving, trying to do the Ollie shuffle. That was amazingly fun.
Yeah,
and
so
cool.
that happened. That was something that was easily facilitated because we were all in space
Yeah.
together. So it was just like an experiment in embodiment and movement and mark making, but we all tried to do the Ali Shuffle, you know, his famous like footwork, and we watched the video and we're kind of trying to do it, but we also paired up and sparred off, and each person just put a different color of paint on their feet. So it's really a record of each person's movement. What I did not get to do when I wanted to do was also, in a very technical and delineated way, try to create like a choreography score or dance score from his foot movement, which is very diagrammatic as a kind of juxtaposition to
You
this
wanted
very
to try to diagram the movement of his feet.
Like
Yes.
like dance instructions.
Oh, the actual feet.
Yeah.
1, 2,
Yeah.
3.
Yeah.
1, 2,
and the
1, 2.
movement, and then that took me down a whole tangent of like how to like write in encode movement, which I thought was interesting, this kind of like relationship between, and we talked about this early on, like intuitive intelligence versus like book learning, and the way that that was always used against Muhammad Ali. He was dyslexic, and so, you know, early on in his career, they were like, oh, he's not very smart, and because, you know, if people don't test well, we assume that that is the measure of their intelligence. But obviously, like you said, like his wit, his street smarts were just like, he could respond on a dime, and like his turn of phrase and everything. And so I thought it was interesting to look at the juxtaposition of those two, but I couldn't even get into the learning of the notation, you know, choreography, for it to, you know, make the other part of this piece.
I had an idea for a part 2 to this piece, though. You do, instead of using paint, you use caustic wax, and then people's feet really start moving, like hot wax flying everywhere. You like, do it on canvas, right?
By the time you got your foot out of the wax, you're already cool.
Don't write Joey on that.
People do this all the time when they walk across hot rocks and stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about,
It's
right?
not,
It's
not the same. It's not the
It is
same.
not the same, but
Hot wax.
that is a kind of trauma. I want to come, that actually does bring us, I think, maybe back a little bit.
It's worth recognizing this was done during COVID. So that's
Absolutely.
a lot of DNA in there. There's a raw feed.
But I want to talk about the trauma,
Oh, okay. So
and not in like the Chocolate City kind of way where, you know, everyone is consuming our trauma on the superficial level and saying how woke they are, but really the ways that you both kind of investigated, one, the trauma of his denial, and then his refusal to be denied, and then the trauma of what it meant to, you know, when that shuffle and the rope-a-dope no longer kept him safe, you know, where he allowed himself to take this beating, and then came back from it to vanquish his opponents. And so there's something in there. I mean, I think that both of your works reflect, and I mean, you said that, you know, you started this thinking about the loss of your mother, and what happens when we watch people we love suffer. And one of the things that I found so difficult to watch in all of the documentaries was his fights. I don't know how you do it, but you see him getting slower and slower in his oratory, and it is traumatic and painful because you know the outcome, you know what this has done to him, and just to see the, you know, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's the maternal in me, but to watch him fight is so jarring, even though he's lived and died. But I want to talk about the trauma.
Well, so I would like to critique what you just said. So, in the way in which you're framing it, so I think it's worth sort of pointing out that we, in the U.S., we like our history to be progressive and triumphant. We like the part where the person climbs a mountain and they get to the mountain. But we don't like to see the second time they tried and they like fell down 5 times and didn't quite make it to the mountain next time.
Are you trying to say that I'm like whitewashing Ali's history?
No.
Are
I'm not
you
saying that.
putting
I'm
me
not
in
saying
that
that.
category?
No. What I recognize within the convention of storytelling, that we don't herald the weakness, but we herald the strength. And there's a kind of not a diminishing because people diminish it, but because it just gets less attention when he takes the fights because he's got to pay the bills and he gets brutalized. And to be able to see that not sort of in a qualitative kind of way, like that, like sort of put a kind of value judgment on it, but to just see it as an aspect of being alive and that compromise and all that stuff is kind of the rich, meaty aspects of being alive, which is more like a French film than it is an American film. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like a French movie really delves in the fall and the muck and like, you know what I mean? So I'm not.
But you're critiquing me.
I'm not critiquing you, but I'm critiquing the frame.
Okay,
Good friend.
because I want to answer it.
Yeah. Well,
My answer
okay, go ahead
contains
and
a
answer
question.
it. Go ahead.
My answer contains a question because both you and I nursed our mothers at the end of their lives, and understood what that meant. Understood that the outcome was only one thing. And there is, I think it's that when I see those fights and I know the outcome already, it's not that I want him to be always heroic and a champion. I just, having nursed many people, my parents, my grandparents, off the mortal coil, there's something very raw and vulnerable in me about watching someone's willingness to do that work because he thought that was the only work that he could do to do what he really wanted to do. So it also contains this sort of sacrifice, I think, that a lot of Black people of that generation made, realizing that they could be something greater than what the world allowed them to be. But so my question is for you, again, back to the work and the when you wrapped the pieces and you made them sculptures, which was the first time you had done that. I want you to describe the feeling of that, of like what it felt like, what you thought you were doing when you rolled the canvas on itself.
Well, it was kind of a non-feeling, which is that you do something for the first time and you don't have anything to judge it by, so you just kind of do the thing, and then it takes some discipline to not judge it and like, is this good, is it bad, but just to do the thing, and then you just step away from it, and then you look at it and you go, well, there it is, and then you just walk away and hope when you look at it the next day that there's something there, right? You don't really know what it is because you don't really have you haven't done it before. So part of it is very kind of formal, but it's also like a bit of a dance, like the way in which a potter throws a pot from a mound of clay. You know what I mean? It's like there's features in the clay that allow the walls to get a certain thickness, that allow for it to go a certain height or a certain width before it just spins out of control and breaks apart. And with these, because the broken glass is inside of them, so each twist and turn is kind of being predetermined by some internal geometry, like its overall shape was really determined by the process. So, but knowing that they were, if I flattened them out, they would be paintings on a wall, but that I've just allowed them to be these kind of twisted tableaus. I don't know, it allows them to kind of exist in the space. It's weird. I almost kind of think of it as like little tumors. They feel like a pulpy thing inside your body that you can feel, but you can't quite make out all its features because you can't see it because it's still inside of you.
Do you feel more connected to these works as a connection to Ali or to your mother?
To my mother, though I did do a lot more breaking with these than I have in the past. So like I really just beat the shit out of these in a way, just like thinking about what would happen if you got punched 20, 30, 40, 50, 75 times, 150, 350 times in 40 minutes. You know what I mean? By somebody whose profession is to break you and your bones and your tissue. You know, what does that feel like?
Yeah. Do you want to respond to that at all?
I don't know if it's a response, but it's definitely a reaction to your pieces as the way you're describing them now. I feel like they almost are like these little secrets. Like the inside is hidden, but it is what gives it the form and shape, but you can't see it. So it's like this whole internal life.
Yeah.
They can't be seen, but it's what gives it its form and its richness.
Mm-hmm. Which is what makes up a person.
Yes, absolutely.
It's the thing that makes up a person.
Yeah. Okay, I guess this should be our last question because it's 5 to 8. What do you think? I take it back. Well, this is going to be maybe our last question. We'll see where this goes. There's a whole lot of controversy happening right now about the documentary that, full transparency, none of us have seen.
No.
Because it releases on Sunday, this coming Sunday. I think we got to see a 60-second or maybe a 30-second clip. But about who gets to tell our stories. And one of the things that I tried to do was make sure that we told our stories in these really intimate ways, in personal ways about being artists in LA and responding to him, large or small, in LA. But do you guys have any comments on the comments that are flying fast and furious across the digital universes about things as they stand?
Just if everyone is unfamiliar, so there's a number of filmmakers, documentary filmmakers, who have taken great issue with PBS kind of disproportionately supporting Ken Burns, to tell the stories that the resources that could be going to more filmmakers, a lot of them are going to him. So there's a kind of there's a general recognition that Ken Burns and his popularity has helped to, kind of hold up PBS as a relevant platform. And there's other filmmakers out there, other filmmakers of color saying, where are the resources for us to tell our stories as well? And there's a podcast which is being created like specifically to address Ken Burns and his telling of the Muhammad Ali story. There's articles that are coming out. There's people who are, organized and acting directly within the ecosystem of PBS to voice their concerns and their outrage around the amount of money and resources that goes to Ken Burns and the amount of attention, the amount of bandwidth that he gets. So we were made aware of this recently, like 3 days ago, 4 days ago, that there was this kind of that there was this protest that was happening in relationship with Ken Burns, which I get. But anyway, that's the picture. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I support the filmmakers and their push. I'm particularly interested. Most of my work recently is around archives, representation, the way history is told. I do a lot of work looking at photographs in archives and like questioning the missing information, why they are in, like who took the picture, what was the subject's, their involvement in being captured. And imagining like all the missing information, like what is another story that could be told in all those gaps. So I feel like it's the time. And as we know, there's a lot of accountability being demanded for like diversity and the way stories are being told. And so
I mean, there's a lot of documentaries about Muhammad Ali. So I think that's sort of not really the point. I mean, I've seen probably 5 or 6 or 7 of myself, and there's probably enough books to stack from here to ceiling on his biography. But there should be resources to tell stories about Abel Banks. You know what I mean? Like, shouldn't there be a feature film about you and the work that you're doing?
I don't think that's
what I mean? Or about Jill, Moniz, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like those are the stories that need to be elevated as well. So if the filmmakers are at the gate saying, "Hey, we have stories we want to tell," let's support them. Let's be behind them. Hey, PBS, support these filmmakers, man. Like Ken Burns is doing all right.
Yeah. Well, it's also just about the way that stories are told and the way that history is told. And literally, like you were saying before, that there's like this an American way a story is told, like there's always a happy ending, like the narrative arc, like there's so many communities that tell stories in different ways. And so it's about time that we start telling stories in different ways. Like let's break the mold, let's break the I don't know, think outside the box of how we tell stories.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no doubt that like the platforms for telling just the widest range of stories has expanded tremendously because of places like Netflix and Hulu. I mean, there's like so many places for these stories, way more choices than when we were coming up. There was Roots, and then there was NFL on TV. That was basically it. But so like there's lots of spaces. That's Soul Train. But I think that in particular because PBS and its mandate that it was designed for the public, that it should be reflective of the public, and because it's tax dollars, you know what I mean. Like we, as the people, have a say so on how those dollars are allocated. So again, PBS, if you're listening, you're one of the thousands of people on this YouTube channel watching this right now. Support these filmmakers.
Right on.
Yeah.
Let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Are we taking any questions, or that's it?
We can take questions now that we're done. You have to have your mask on, sir. Hello.